The eternal problem with video game adaptations has always been how to translate their gameplay into something palatable for a non-interactive medium. Sometimes that has meant ejecting the gameplay components completely and focusing only on the narrative aspects of the property. Other times, usually unsuccessfully, it means giving slightly more context to why the gameplay segments are occurring before launching into an action scene approximation of the game. And sometimes, adaptations simply don't even try to resemble the original property in the first place, which is not inherently a bad thing. Taking all these considerations into account, Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva was never going to be a difficult assignment as far as movie adaptations go. The games are almost already an animated movie to begin with a heavy emphasis on linear storytelling and typically containing upwards of 30 minutes of voiced animation per entry, starting with Unwound Future. In that way, Eternal Diva had the blueprint already laid out. All it needed to do was copy the games to the letter, subtract the 30-minute sliding block puzzles, and bam, movie. The results are clear. Upon first impression, Eternal Diva nails the style of Layton. The animation looks just like the games, unsurprising given it's by the same studio, PA Works. Even the many CG constructions the movie is highly reliant on look perfectly stylized within the series. The mystery of a dead woman coming back to life in the body of a little girl is exactly the kind of high-concept premise we've come to expect. And the English voice acting, well, that's a little weird actually. Some original actors reprise their roles from the games, others don't, but everyone sounds off in the dub for some reason. It's as if their voices have been slowed down and put through an audio filter. The quality of the mics they're speaking through doesn't sound great either. Christopher Robin Miller almost sounds sick. Much as how Versus found success in being a crossover by focusing on original material, Eternal Diva wisely decides to craft its own original story, instead of getting bogged down by excessive fan service. Which isn't to say there isn't any, quite the opposite, but most of it is unnoticeable if you aren't actively looking. Beluga walking along the theater corridor, Claudia sitting on the couch in a London residence, the diabolical box in Schrader's office, or the guy Emmy beat up in Last Spectre appearing in one of the end credits images, itself a slideshow styled in the same way the games do it. Tastefully done fan service, in other words. Eternal Diva's score is fantastic too, both the original tunes and the many returning ones slotted in between important moments. Indeed, Eternal Diva gets off to a very good start, managing to intuitively contextualize the puzzle-solving gameplay as a competition amongst the audience for the gift of eternal life. The movie even manages to incorporate the puzzle themes diegetically, with a countdown timer for how long the guests have to submit their solution. Fittingly, the puzzles the group have to solve are the tricky worded brain teaser variety, the ones the series are infamous for. It's such a naturalistic inclusion of the puzzles, someone unfamiliar might not even recognize they're watching translated game mechanics. Yet once we reach Ambrosia, things start to falter. Eternal Diva studies the Layton blueprint so closely it begins to lose the forest for the trees. The second half of Eternal Diva feels like a video game. I don't really mean that in an affectionate way either. Somehow Eternal Diva feels more video gamey than the actual video games themselves. Take Descalet's castle. What is the purpose of Descalet building a castle here? I mean, I know it's actually a digging machine, but why the pretext? It's true Layton games have always had rather extravagant final dungeons, but those final dungeons were rooted within the locations of the game. The tower in Saint Mystere was designed both as the maintenance workshop for the residents of the village, as well as an intentionally designed obstacle so that only the worthy could claim the golden apple. Hertzen Castle was the home of the wealthiest family in Full Sense, now dusty and decrepit from decades of neglect. Reunion Inn was the centerpiece of Monte d'Or, the first building to be constructed, a monument so large it could act as a beacon for Henry's long-lost friend. These places had a history and a context that made the surrounding setting of the game come alive. An ominous castle sitting on a lifeless island is arbitrary. It doesn't tell us much of anything about the island of Ambrosia or relate thematically to our central cast. It feels like Eternal Diva recognized it should have a final dungeon equivalent, but struggled to think up a convincing structure to fit the location. It probably ought to be something unique to Ambrosia. That's hardly where the arbitrariness ends. Eternal Diva treats Descalet like he's some kind of supervillain final boss. He has goons littered throughout the Crown Patone in his castle to do his bidding. But where did he get them from? Again, the games were more thoughtful about this. Descalay was able to manufacture the digging machines in Last Spectre not because he had somehow amassed a cult of loyal followers, but because he controlled the town's levers, blackmailing the mayor and police force. He operated alone in Miracle Mask, but explicitly manipulated Randall to his own ends to gain the Mask of Chaos. And when Layton villains do have fodder attached to them, it's because they are part of an organized crime syndicate, usually bought and paid for or are actively coerced, as was the case with the family in Unwound Future or Targent and Azran Legacy respectively. Here, Descalay just has a posse of Goombas, for some reason, somehow. They will never show up again. So we have a supervillain final boss with a coterie of minions to beat up in his World 8-4 looking castle. Naturally, the story must conclude with a climactic boss battle. Eternal Diva provides, Descalay transforming his property into a giant mech to dig up the entirety of Ambrosia. I'll be honest, I don't much care for the giant robot castle. On paper, it sounds very similar to the endings of Unwound Future and Last Spectre, both of which also featured final boss battles against giant machines. But as is becoming a pattern at this point, these games were much more thoughtful about these final battles. The giant mechs meant something to their respective stories. Clive's weapon was rage against corruption personified, using Bill Hawks as the almost literal fuel to power his anger. Descalay's technological spider in Last Spectre dueled with the ancient Lucia, symbolizing the game's central conflict on whether the town's authenticity could be retained by giving up its legends and allowing industrialization to take over. A battle for the soul of Misthallery, in effect. The giant robot castle, on the other hand, is just a giant robot castle. Its primary purpose is to give our protagonists one, admittedly very well animated, action scene before the movie's credits. What is its thematic significance? Plot-wise, too, the battle is pointless. Layton already figured out the third song before the swordplay even began, so he could have just pointed this out to Descalay and everyone could have been spared the whole ordeal. Eternal Diva desperately wants to have all the cool moments that happen at the end of your typical Layton adventure, but without that extra clarity of meaning the games are always good at giving. It's too self-indulgent to feel earned. Is Layton and Descalay dueling on top of a shambling robot epic? I certainly won't be the one to deny it, but I wonder if someone who's unfamiliar with common Layton tropes would feel even half as charmed by the moment. I wonder if they would interpret the evil fortress and Luke randomly talking to wolves and thugs for hire and sparring matches at the end of the hour as somewhat confused elements of yet another video game movie struggling to adapt its source material to a different medium. The movie lacks those little character moments that made games like Unwound Future so great. The ultimate irony, of course, being that Eternal Diva was doing a much more clever job when it was adapting the Layton series' gameplay to the silver screen than when it was replicating its storytelling. There's a moment in the final scene I quite like. Melina, just before leaving Janice's body, tells her father,
"Listen to me. You have to start a new life."
Oh, I don't want a new life.
That right there is the story. What might Eternal Diva look like if it offered us a more subdued Descalay, and honed in on this conflict instead? A father who would rather wither away than ever leave his child to imperfect memory. A daughter who is okay with the cost of that choice until she sees how it harms her dear friend's well-being. I think I'd trade in a giant robot castle for that story any day of the week.